Alright, so it came out pretty good. Unfortunately, my styrofoam wand was breaking there towards the end. It's gotten really wobbly now and it's going to snap, so I'll have to be replacing that before I do my next big project. But I won't be doing anything quite as big as this for a little while. Everything else I'm doing is not in styrofoam, or at least it doesn't require this sort of aging and teaking. So what I'll need to do is continue getting rid of all the wisps that are stuck on there, and then I need to age and tear this down a little better, because you can see those marks from the wand, and some of it looks good, but some of it just needs to be broken up with my fingers or pushed down a little bit, so it looks a little more natural, like wear and tear. Try to take a little bit of the sharpness. That's what I was going for in the whole thing, is get rid of as many sharp corners as possible, but still give it structure. So then I'm going to reinforce a couple areas with glue that I didn't notice may have been gaps before, and that'll just give it all a little more structure. I'll do the back piece over here because what I forgot to do, I noticed this when I was making it, is there's the thumb hole from the original piece of styrofoam, and I tried to get all the sides to look kind of uniform, so the base of a castle or a fortification, and probably the players aren't going to be sitting on this side, but just in case, I'm just going to put another piece, and I'm just going to rip it up real good to look like really worn stone to mask this area. I also wanted to maybe run LED lights through the base, and this was the place I was going to do that, but I think I'll save that for another project, something a little more detailed. Next, I will be adding PVA glue and construction sand in a lot of the corners and on top of the walls. That is what gave this the texture, which is gorgeous. I love the way it picks out the paint. And then there, and even rubble piles in the middle, like this one here, or just the way it comes up on the edge there. So I'll be adding a lot of that, and then this will have to sit for about 24 hours. I'll probably have to take it outside to dust out all the sand that remains, because it'll look pretty bad. I'll get it all over the place in the house. Then I'm going to flat black the whole thing, and that takes a little while, so I definitely had to go out and buy a larger bottle instead of just the little mini bottles that I normally get for most paints. And that'll take a little while to dry, because you almost want to double layer something this big. A lot of light will shine through bigger pieces, even in darker rooms. So to make sure it's rich and black, and I get all the recesses, so that when it comes to painting, that darkness that remains inside are shadowed, and a little bit of the gray will get in, and a little bit of the other colors, but you still want the recesses to be shadowed, and that's what gives it such a dark and ancient look. So I may snap a few pictures of that, and then we'll fire things back up with the gray painting just a sec. Alright, so jumping ahead, you can see that I have added a lot more rubble just using regular white glue. And I put some along the edges and on the tops of most surfaces. Try to get some into cracks on the walls. A little bit here and there. And then so it wouldn't be too globby, I did use a paintbrush and then added on heavy construction sand. Just that little container of it. So what I'll do is I'll let this dry overnight, maybe just for a few hours, and then maybe late night tonight I can just flat black it all. And I will not be able to use a spray can because the styrofoam will melt, so this will have to be a hand done job. And there isn't going to be this much rubble once it's done. A lot of that comes back up. It's just the piles of it for now. And we'll see what it looks like when it's dry and dusted off. Alright, so everything's been flat black painted. The closer you get, the more you notice there are occasionally tiny, tiny little pinpricks of the white styrofoam that show through, but that's okay. You will want to do the best you can to get in really deep with a brush in as many of those holes, because the areas that you do try, and it doesn't really come on the camera, maybe in the light, that area that I gouged out has a lot of tiny little recesses, so you want to get as much paint in there as you can. So one way to do that is to water down the paint a little bit more, but still, occasionally there's a little bit there, tiny bit here, but it's so small, and when I add the gray on top of it, you won't see it. So I'm going to be using a dry brush technique. Basically, I have a dry brush for some of the higher layers, but this layer, I'm probably going to want to have a slightly moister brush. So I've got my water. Because I do want a lot of the gray to saturate in as well. And I have different colors ready to go. 2 different grays. Well, actually, 3 different grays. But you really only need 1 to make this work. Maybe a gray and a white. I use sort of a beige or a khaki color as well. 2 different greens to add vegetation. And occasionally I'll put in a little punch of red. Just a little bit to give it some color and to give it some depth. And then something usually plastic that I throw away. This one, since you can use both sides. I've seen people use paper plates. That works really well too. Just give myself a little dollop. And try to get a lot of it off. You want to go light at first. You want to figure out how much is going to apply. And gentle strokes. And you will want to do sort of a crisscross. Otherwise, you'll see all your brush strokes going one direction as opposed to another. So, you can see it's already picking up the lines and the cracks. And in finer detail, you can see it's also picking up the styrofoam texture, which when it comes to stonework, that is fine. That's kind of what we're looking for. Get a little bit more. So you're going to keep loading up your brush. And remember, it always comes on a little bit more intense than the way it's going to dry. So if it seems a little extreme in places, it's probably okay. But if you get a little too intense with your color, you just go back in a little later on with a darker gray or a little bit more black. And that can possibly muddy things up, but it'll tone stuff down in the long run. Okay. Now sometimes in a place like that I need to dig in just a little bit to pick up some of the surfaces of the stone. Just dig in a little bit more. It's really hard to see from there, I know. Right. And then, these other stone textures here, you do the same exact thing. Try to be light and gentle with it. Otherwise, it all becomes one colored surface. And very quickly, you see the benefit of doing this. All right. To quote my liege lord DM Scotty, looking good. Looking real good. Looking nice. And then here in the areas, the recesses, the rubble. And I'll go back and do a little better detail to it, but okay. We're going for a better shot. Yeah, so look at that. Really picks up everything that you want it to. And the walls, push those up a little more. Fantastic. So I know it's still wet, and I've got a little figurine. I don't mind getting a little paint on the base. But already, just a few seconds, I haven't even done multiple layers of color. we'll come back after I've grayed this whole thing out and show you a little bit of highlights and using some of the khaki. Alright, so in just a short amount of time, you can see that the paint took really well, and this is just one color of gray. So really, if that's all that you use, I mean, it works. It may be kind of hard to see in this room with the sunlight, but check that out. That's just really interesting. And you rely on the imperfections of the styrofoam and where you put the little bit of rubble, all that construction sand, just picks up a color. Picks up really nice. So I even do the back and sides, just so when it's sitting on the table it looks pretty good. But you'll see the underside is still just white. I'm not going to spend time on all of that, but you'll even want to try to get underneath the archways. Can you even see in there? Just because you know that the character, they're going to get in there. They're going to look. Now, if you don't get to it, that's okay. Shadow is important. And I do go a little heavy on my painting, but it's because I'm just going to punch it up with some other colors. Alright, now back to the dry brushing technique. So I'll take my paintbrush, and it's already been dipped in water and rinsed and dried out pretty good. And I'm going to use a little bit of a, I think it's called khaki. I also have one called Territorial Beige that works really well. Just get the tiniest amount on your brush. I mean, really, really dry it out. And then you want to find some rubble piles. Here's one. Right? Just barely dab at it. It'll dry a little darker. Same in here. Just a little bit. And occasionally you can bring streaks of color out into the field. But it's just a very subtle color shade. Very subtle. Get a little bit more. I like to get a lot on the brush bristles, way high up, then get a lot of it off. Okay, and then here's another pile. The corners, and so on. So I'll do a little bit more of that. I'll also take my two colors of green. I usually do a darker green and a lighter green. I'll show you why. A little bit of green. Maybe I'll use a different brush for this. Okay. This sometimes you can water down a little bit because you don't want a lot. And then especially in areas that you would imagine are even darker and wetter than everywhere else, you might want to add just a little bit of green. Bring it out in places. Spread it around. You don't want to do all of it, so the whole thing looks green. But if you look at this example, just very subtle in places, looks more mossy, might even be slick in game. So you, when the characters stand there and they try to run or do something, maybe you inhibit their movement to a degree. And then what was neat, this is just the way it happened on the back, is that texture allowed it really easy to streak downwards. So as if maybe a lot of the moss was growing here, but as it rained, it just kept growing down. Or even if it were to grow upward from the ground and do streaks of lighter and darker gray. So I'm going to continue to touch up the beige and the green, and we'll see what that looks like.